Welcome to this training 2 of Sobek for Curators and Collection Managers. Today we're going to focus on submitting and editing resource files and metadata. Most of that will be online, but I'll show you also some bulk importing, and we'll just sort of talk about some of the strategies to get material into Sobek as well, into a Sobek repository. This is, as I say, this is training 2. This is the second part of a 4-part training session that we're doing here, Sobek for Curators and Collection Managers training series. All of these will be put online at that location, youtube.com/user/SobekCM. They'll also be made available from UF's repository at ufdc.ufl.edu/ir403545. And the slides will be made available there as well as the videos. So the first presentation was from John Nemmers. He just introduced SobekCM's capabilities, talked about sort of the whole spectrum of functionality that's built into the system. The second session is this one that we're looking at. The third is one looking at the quality control online tool, which we use to build structural metadata online through the repository, and also looking at serial hierarchy. Sort of how do we link items to titles, and how do we determine how to use that functionality when we're looking at digitizing archival content, for example. In the fourth session, we'll be looking at curator tools and collection manager tools. These are quite new tools that have been added to allow users online to perform basically all of the collection management tools that we could do before in the back. So now you can change the different search options you have. You can add child pages. You can create child collections. So these are available to anybody who is either the admin of an entire system or is a curator collection manager over a single collection within a Sobek repository. So, as I say, we're looking at the metadata section today. So the first part of this is our agenda for the entire webinar. We're looking at metadata first, sort of a little bit in theory. We'll look at it, how it works in SobekCM as well. We'll look at how we do metadata for a new digital project. If we're looking at like new project comes in, we can basically ask these questions of where can I get the metadata, how can I get it into the repository. And to that vein, I'll show you importing records. We can import records, bulk imports from MARC reports or some spreadsheets. I'll show you two concepts that are really important, I think, when you're planning a digital project in a Sobek system. And the first one is looking at customizing your templates, and the other one is defining default metadata. And then we'll just quickly do quite a few demos. We'll look at online submission with files, without files. We'll look at editing your metadata once it's online. We'll look at uploading new images and files to an existing item. We'll look at editing behaviors. And we'll look at adding a new volume to an existing title as well. At the very end, I'll show you the beta of what we're working on, which will be going out with the new version 4.0 of Sobek, which is adding spatial information to your item and geo-placing a map online. That's something we're really excited about, and will be released in version 4.0. So first off, metadata. This is more of the dry theory part of metadata a little bit, but we have to look at how it works in Sobek. So we need to look at the metadata architecture. I'm going to quickly go through mets and mods. We're not going to expose you to much of the XML, but we need to at least make sure that the terms are familiar, because that is basically what builds metadata within Sobek. Most items in Sobek are mets mods items. And then we'll look at extension schemas that exist. We'll talk a little bit about how we choose to make an extension schema when we're looking at new metadata that's coming in, or new metadata types that we're looking at. And then I'll give you an example of one of the extension schemas that we've done. So this is the basic architecture of any digital resource within a SobekCM repository. Every item within a SobekCM repository is wrapped in a METS wrapper. So this is an XML standard, which is just a wrapper that goes around every other piece of information about that digital resource. And then we have a large, major, bulky section here of all the bibliographic data, or the descriptive metadata about that item. So this is represents all the work that our catalogers are doing, and that are looking at the item, they're creating this bibliographic data, and that's where the bulk of it would go. In most cases, it's mods. You can choose to store it as MARC or Dublin Core if you'd like. And then after that, we have these extension schemas. So we have any number of extension schemas, and that's extendable. So just two examples here. I have VRA, Darwin Core, etc. You can have as many extension schemas as you'd like inside a METS wrapper. Then we have a little bit of additional Sobek custom metadata that we use. but most of this ends up getting pushed into the database. So quite often that additional custom metadata is really just for the new incoming object. So if you're loading a new object, brand new, you could list things like what collection should it be in, what are the word marks, etc. And that would all go here in this additional custom metadata section. So what is METS? This is the big wrapper around everything, right? So it's the Metadata Encoding and Transmission Standard. That's what it stands for. It's a Library of Congress standard from 2001. The key thing is that it is the wrapper that accepts any XML schemas inside of it. So it basically says this is the structure for a digital resource, but it doesn't tell you how to necessarily describe that digital resource. That's left to our next standard. We'll talk about mods. So what's in a METS wrapper? A METS metadata package. There are 5 major sections that are mostly utilized. There's the METS header. This is a very small section. It's really information about the METS file itself. Who wrote this METS file? What was the history of this METS file? So when was it first created? What's the last modification date? What's the record status for this individual METS file? So again, you don't get things here about your digital object. You get things here about the actual file itself. And so the second section is where we start to store all that data about the object, both the original manifestation and your digital object as well. So that's your bibliographic data or descriptive metadata, and that sits in a DMD section. You can have multiple ones of these. We almost always do, it seems like. Then there's an administrative information section. This can be used for more customized metadata, technical data about the files, maybe rights information about how the item can be utilized. This would be rights information above and beyond, I guess, what is often stored in the DMD section. So this is an optional section. It's not something you always see when you look at a METS package. The fourth section is the file sections. This is really a list of all the files that are grouped by type. It's just a list. It doesn't, at this point in the file sec, it doesn't explain the structure of the item. It doesn't say what the names of these pages are. It's really just a list of files. And then the last section is a structure map. So this is where we start to create the structure of your digital object. This is where you're looking at basically a table of contents. So you list divisions and pages, and this links back to your file section. We'll see a lot more about this in the third section when we talk about structural metadata, because a lot of that, all of that is stored really in these two sections. So this is what the METS wrapper is. It's basically a wrapper. It has places to hold descriptive data, has information about the files, and structure. So the one we utilize most often to store our bibliographic descriptive metadata is mods. So this is the Metadata Object Description Standard. Again, it's a well-established standard from Library of Congress. In fact, it is the de facto standard for digital libraries, is having a METS package, METS wrapper, with mods as your descriptive metadata, or at least the core of your descriptive metadata. So some of the positives are it can handle a very large subset of MARC tags. So for those who are coming from the library background and are used to working with MARC records, it can handle most of those tags in the MARC record can be handled within mods. So it handles complex objects very well. So sort of what is a complex object? When I say a complex object, I mean if you're looking at a named entity and how that's related to your digital resource, and in some standards, it would just be like a field, like one line. And so in that line, you'd end up sticking every piece of data about that person. But in mods, the named entity itself is a complex object with subfields, so you can separate first name, last name, roles. You can separate their affiliation, where they're from. So we'll see an example of that as we get further into this. One of the negatives is that, again, from a library standpoint, if you take a MARC record and you import it to a mods and then you auto-generate a MARC afterwards, you do lose some refinements. We've spent almost a whole year, I guess, actually, working with our catalogers to try to perfect that and try to eke out a little bit more by utilizing display labels and even in some cases looking at the XML ID to try to get a better round-trip portability between MARC and mods. So as we said, here's our main architecture again. We're looking at a METS wrapper. We have mods right there. That's the bulk of this. And then we have these extension schemas coming in off the bottom. So the extension metadata modules are essentially little other plugins that we've added into the system that are standard at this point that give access to other metadata fields. So basically you have this core brain of SobekCM metadata, and this represents Basically, it was based on mods originally. And then things that don't sit in mods, extra little fields, we create these extension schemas for. So out of the box, SobekCM supports 10 extension metadata modules. This is a diagram which is online. I think it's directly under our original help pages. And this is basically the core brain of our system. And then each one of these little satellites are the extension metadata modules. So let's pull this up. And this is online. This is a PDF, but you can do some zooming in. So here's an example again of a extension schema right here. It's the geospatial metadata module. It's still loading in here. You got the learning object metadata module, the EAD metadata module. Right here you can see this is the core bibliographic data. So most of this, if you start looking at these terms, you'll see they're exactly mods. So that's what I mean by the core was built around the mod standard. And then we start adding, so this core is actually the mods. And then if you go down here, it's sort of the larger METS package. So we have the METS header, we start to have some behaviors that we utilize in the system, and we have the files and divisions. So this represents the file section and the struct map. And this is your METS header, very specific data. And then if you start coming here, we see these extension schemas. So here's an extension schema to represent geospatial metadata information for a single digital resource. So we have KML reference, then we link to these lines, points, polygons. Here's an EAD metadata module. We have one for the Florida Digital Archive, dark archive. Learning objects we pointed out. So there's a whole list of these. We have about, as I said, 10 of these. And here's the list of what we have. We have dates. This is really for archiving, an archiving schema for a Florida-centric system. We have Darwin Core, which represents zoological taxonomies. So we're looking at kingdom, phylum, those kind of things. We have a special section for EADs. So we find it useful sometimes to be able to read an EAD into the same digital resource, but we wanted to capture all the container lists, for example. So that is additional data for that. We have ones for ETDs, which we use for theses and dissertations. The geospatial we represent as GML. We have IEEE LOM, which is the learning object metadata. We have some custom metadata for oral histories, for performing arts. We have special rights information, and VRA core, which is visual and museum material specific. So let's look at this VRA core. It gives you an example of how we approach extension metadata modules, for example. So VRA core is an established metadata standard from the Visual Resource Association, developed in 1996, so it's actually quite an early one. It was based on some standard Dublin core tags, but then it also added these really interesting unique tags that they needed for visual cultural material describing. They added some cultural context values, style, technique, very detailed measurements tags. So these are tags that are quite useful that don't sit within mods. So when we needed access to these, we looked for this, we found a standard, VRA core, and we decided we would implement a portion of VRA core. So particular, what we looked at was these fields that don't pre-exist in mods. So these were fields that we had no access to previously, or access not as refined as VRA core allows. So cultural context, inscriptions, materials, measurements, state additions, style periods, and techniques. So particularly the point is here, we don't duplicate pre-existing fields. So the very first thing we do when we look, if you say here's a schema or a standard that I'd like to implement, we start looking at what the fields are, what fields are unique to that standard, and then we implement the unique standards, the unique fields from that standard. And that's exactly what we did here. There's no need to duplicate title, date, description. Those are already sitting in the core brain of the system based on mods. So we just add these additional fields into the VRA core. So it's quite simple to add new extension modules to this. You just create a new metadata module and you put readers and writers. So you can create new modules, you can create new readers, writers as little libraries that you can add to your SobekCM library. So this brings us into the question of, okay, now we get an idea what metadata sits in Sobek, what that's like. So when I approach a new digital project, we have to start asking ourselves these questions about our metadata. First and foremost, is there existing metadata for this project? Is their data either in a museum catalog or in a library catalog? Or do we have to create this metadata from scratch? If it's existing, I guess the question is, what is the format of this? And if it's new, then I guess the question is, what's the easiest way for you to enter the data, to create the data? Can you use a spreadsheet to create it? Will that be sufficient for your needs? And then given all this, how do we get the data into Sobek? And what are some of the pros and the cons of each way one can do this? Obviously, our goal is to create a SobekCM record with your digital resources attached. So this is our final goal. And we're starting either with existing records or no or poor records. So basically, how do we go? How do we bridge this gap between these two? These are some of the tools that are provided in the Sobek library for doing this. We have the MARC importer for importing MARC 21 records from a library catalog. We have a spreadsheet importer, which can be utilized for many, many reasons, going from many different data sources. Then going online, you could just add the volume online to an existing title. So that's a case where you still have some existing records already in Sobek. Or you could just do a new web submit and submit the resource as a sort of institutional repository style of submission. So here's some sort of lines of, if you have an existing record, then obviously we want to be looking at the imports. The MARC import brings us quite a bit of richness, as we'll see. We have the spreadsheet importer, or you could add it to an existing title. If it's a poor record or no record and you find yourself having to create the metadata, then you can really do two things. You can put it into a spreadsheet first, build the spreadsheet, and then import it. Or you could just submit them one by one through the web interface. So I want to look at these bulk importing, these two to the right, MARC import and spreadsheet import. So these are the biggest bulk import systems that we utilize quite commonly on a day-to-day basis. So the first thing we'll look at is importing from a MARC record. So to utilize this, we have a tool called the Smart tool, which is the Sobek management and reporting tool. So here's the management reporting tool. It's connected to the UFDC library itself. That's why it says UFDC Manager. We can view UFDC items. This gives us a nice sort of spreadsheet view. If we wanted to do a search, we could search for the word Haiti maybe in the title. You can limit to different collections over here, different institutions, for example. This will go out to the database. It'll pull in a search. Running a little bit slow right now. Oh, there we go. So we can see, you can click into one, you can start working with the individual item, or you can work with this entire list here. So I guess we have, maybe that's why it was slow. We have 31,000 items and 4,100 titles with Haiti in the title. So, or one of the titles, whether that's the uniform title, the main title, for example. So then we'll go to import records. These are where we do the bulk imports. The first option is MARC file of records. So we'll select this. I have a MARC record here on my desktop, so I'll pull it in. So there's very few options here because the MARC record basically contains most of the data already. So you could override a material type if we wanted. We can give it an aggregation code. So let's say we want to add this into one of our training collections. We'll select DLOC training. We can say it should go in private. We can say it should go in public, either way. A tickler is just a way later on to tie these together. So you could then do a search on the tickler and say, what is the status of all these items that I imported today? So this is quite useful. And by default, it takes the name of the file you imported. If your name is not descriptive enough, of course, you could change it as well. If you wanted to add a date or something. And basically any other metadata field that's here, you could add as a constant. So you could say, all of this material is about a certain state. Of course, you would think that that would be in your MARC record, so we don't use this very often. But if you know for a fact that it's not, this is certainly a great place that you can add constant metadata for every one of these items. So there's a little checkbox here that says execute in preview mode or non-preview mode. We'll hit execute. So it pops up and tells us that it was able to find a matching record already in the system. It matched it by our library catalog number, which is an ALIF number. So you can now tell it create a new record anyway. You can tell it to skip this record, or you can tell it to overlay the existing one. So this has all already been imported, so I'm going to go ahead and say skip this record and tell it to use this option for every occurrence in the file. So it skipped 4 of them. It would have saved 3 brand new ones, so we'll hit OK. So a new record would have been created in this case, a new record would have been created in this case, and a new record would have been created in this case. So in these cases, the record would have been skipped as we requested because it was a pre-existing record with the same aleph number. So it lets you know the record, the current digital object identifier for those over here. You can print this out, you can save this to Excel if you like. So this is just a quick thing to show you your results from your Mark import. So the next one we'll be looking at is the spreadsheet importer. Okay, so we're going to look at the spreadsheet import here. So now we'll say, let's look at a spreadsheet here. We have a spreadsheet, which is a section of a project we had worked on. We'll pull this up. So you can see we have a title of this, we have series title, physical description, creator, interviewee, interviewee, subject keywords, abstract, material type, language. So we have just very simple data here about this item. And we can tell this that we want to import it. We'll go to spreadsheet of records, what we want to import. We'll navigate to our Excel file, select whichever worksheet we would like. And what we see here is the name of the column. What we see here is the where it maps to. So we can select things. We see these didn't map completely, so we can go ahead and map this to creator. And likewise, we could map this to creator. Subject keyword, abstract summary did not map, so we'll map this to abstract. And country of origin, we'll just map this to country. So we do have some standard spreadsheets that are available on our website, but you can really map this to anything. Geography, country. As you can see, any column name, as long as it makes sense, can be mapped appropriately. In some cases here, they've tried to say this creator is an interviewer. This wasn't exactly done correctly. What they should have done was created another column that was the role. So you could have the creator and then the creator role right after that, and it will match them up. But we'll just import this as it is. I do want to, oh yeah, click here. You can show your data, so you can see that you actually have all the data came in semi-correctly. So one note on this, you see title and series title and then bib. So this is, we'll talk about serial hierarchy more in our next training, but this is a way to force it to say these 4 items should belong under really a same title. Like they're related enough that we would like them to be the same bib, the same bibliographic object within the system. They'll just be individual items underneath that. So obviously there's many different ways to approach taking these different objects, these different files, and putting them together. And you could have made one object, one item that has the interview, the transcript, and the photograph, and the English interview. In this case, that they wanted to do was have each item stand on its own, but pull together to say it's all under the same bib or a same overarching title. So you see that matches to bib ID. That's fine. You can execute this in preview mode. We'll go ahead and deselect that, and we'll hit execute. All right, so we didn't cover the constants. So there's things that are required. To use this importer, you're required to choose a collection. So we'll go here and click delock training. So this is, you can see this is the same thing we had in the Mark record. In the Mark record, there's no need importer. There's no need to create mappings because we understand the format and the structure of a Mark record. So in the spreadsheet, this mappings tab is added, but the constants tab is exactly the same. So revealing test import. We don't need to give material type. We believe that is in the spreadsheet. We'll take a look. Title and type are 2 things that are absolutely required. We see there is material type listed here, so we should be good. We'll go ahead and hit the execute button again. Again, you could run it in preview mode if you liked here, and you can take a look and see how it, one of the most or the best parts about the preview mode is it shows you how it will lump these things hierarchically. So you can see all 4 of these objects have the same title, for example. So we'll hit OK. It both saves a new sheet to the Excel spreadsheet called output or preview. If it was in preview mode, you might have seen those. Those are actually already in here before we ran it from a previous import. So you can see it imported. You can see these first 4 items have the same bib ID and different vids. So these are 2 terms that are very important in our system. We have the bibliographic identifier that represents the title, and we have the vid, which is the volume identifier. So we'll look at this a little bit more when we're actually adding the metadata and adding new volumes to existing titles. But I just wanted to mention it here. You can see that there's 3 different bibs. So essentially this has created 3 different titles, and then each one of these titles has 4 different volumes underneath it. And you can see everything get imported here. So again, you can print this, you can save it. As I mentioned though, it does create a new sheet within your Excel file that has all of this as well. And if there are any errors, they'd be represented there as well. So that's just a quick run through of how you can use the Smart Tool Import Records option to import from a MARC record or a spreadsheet. So 2 other terms that are important to know about when you're approaching a digital project in a Sobek system is templates and default metadata. So a template is basically what it tells the system what fields you want to have editable during online submission or editing. We have quite a few different templates in the system. The bulk of them, and where we have the most variety, is for inputting. So when you go in and say, I want to start a new item online, you only want certain fields to be shown. And that is what the templates manage to do. So let me show you a quick demo of this. Did I get there? No. Oh. Okay. So we'll pull up UFDC and we'll go into, I'll have to log on, of course, to have access to our templates. So we will sign on with my UFDC authentication. Okay, so now I've signed on, and it says welcome back, and we can say start a new item. Start a new item. Since I have access to multiple templates and multiple default metadata sets, they're actually offered to me here. If you only had access to one template or one default metadata set, they would not appear here. So for the template, we'll just start with IR. This is the University of Florida IR template that we use. The default metadata, there's many different default metadata. We'll leave it at the one it's set on. We'll just hit accept. So you can see these fields that are offered to me. That we have a single page called item description here. It says material information, title, material type. We have a special material type we use for the institutional repository. We have creator, publication. So these are the fields we decided to expose initially for users when they're submitting content through the institutional repository. We generally, in our system, use the philosophy that we should start with a subset of the fields and then allow users to edit the complete set of metadata fields that are possible. So that's what we're doing here. We're only exposing a very small set of our metadata. And then if the user enters the data, go to the next page. And this next page will allow us to upload items. So this is all controlled by the templates. So we come back here and we can go to maybe a different template. We'll look at the Digital Library of the Caribbean template. We can set it for DLOC as the default metadata. Again, the first step is to grant it permissions. This is configurable in the template. This text is configurable in each template as well. And now we can see we're seeing different fields. We start with main title as well, but we have this other titles field. Our resource types are different. We have physical description, then we go to language, holding location data, creator, publisher. So we have more fields here and certainly different fields as well. So all of this again is these fields, what fields we expose and what format they are all set through the template. I'll show you one more example. We can go to the oral history, hit accept. And you see in this case, we extremely limited the number of fields that are exposed. We've given them, there's a particular ID that our Samuel Proctor oral history program uses. We've exposed a field just to accept that ID. We have interview title, interviewee, interviewer, interview date, and abstract. So very few fields are exposed, and some of them are very specific to the oral histories. And in this case, it's just the title, but we've customized it to say interview title. So if you switch between templates like you're seeing, you might see that it actually pulls over some data with you You can always click clear if you think that you're switching templates or default metadata and you pulled over some. So that's the core of the original idea of the template, was just control what fields users have access to through the system. And on top of that as well, there's many other options that get put into this. One is you can break things down into different pages and different panels. In all of these cases, we try to keep the metadata down to one page, but you could have multiple pages of metadata for submitting as well. And we do, on some internal templates, we do use that option. So some of the other options that come with a template is, can a user submit a file? Can a user submit a URL? Another flag says, is it required that they submit one of these, or both of them, or neither? Item visibility, so you can indicate in the template, items that come through this template should be initially set as private, or initially set as public. And this ties in very much with the next option, which is an email address to receive notifications of submissions. So this is a great way to say, I have a template I want to open up to general use, but I don't want material to just immediately become public. I'd like to be notified that something has been submitted. Give me a chance to go look at it, review it, and then I will make it public. So these two options really fit into that sort of a workflow. Another option says to include the user as the author. This is particularly used for the institutional repository. So that would be exposed. The user could then remove their name if they weren't the true author. But it's just a flag that's in there just to say, start with that. Then we have the permission statement. This is the grant of permissions that we've been agreeing to at the beginning of this. So you can set that, all that text for that can be configured completely. You can also set the bib ID. This is, again, the bibliographic identifier. In some cases, we have said we want to use these set of bib IDs for this project or this project or this project. So that can additionally be set through your template. And that really is just a way for you to manage how your items are separated into different areas. The custom help page URL, you can also say, I like to have a help option in this template up in the top right corner. I'd like to override the basic help pages maybe for the editing and provide my own help page for this one single template. These are all ways that you can really customize this template and make it specific to your digital project. So these are stored as XML files at the instance level. So you need to talk to an administrator of your system or a portal administrator, and they can help create these templates for you. So templates define sort of some of the behaviors of how it gets into the system and also what is exposed to the user to edit. So a complementary thing is these default metadata sets. So default metadata is essentially something that's applied whenever a new item is submitted through the interface. And it's not just metadata. We'll talk about metadata versus behaviors later, but it really is metadata and behaviors. So you could, in your default metadata, you can say things like, this should be added to this collection. This word mark should be used on the left-hand side. This is the right statement that should be utilized for my collection. So these are actually stored as metsmods files at the instance level. So anything that you can store within a SobekCM digital resource file can be set up as your default metadata. Very much like to make these user specific. They're currently at the instance level, but we realize how handy these are. We like to make it so that a single user can sort of be sitting there looking at one mets file of one digital resource and say, I want this to be a new project for me or a new default metadata, so that in my single project I'm working on, that this thing will then always be applied initially. So it's a great tool. And these were previously called projects in the earlier versions of our system. I just mentioned that just for mapping purposes. So I'll show you that as well. We'll look at DLock. I think one of these are pretty good. Clear, right. So in this case, these partners of ours are using the default DLock template, but we've created all of this default metadata for them. They're working on a set of black and white negative slides, and so they wanted to basically say all of this data should always appear in every single one of our items. So when they come along, they digitize their slide, they come here online ready to enter it. They don't have to re-enter all of this data, it's already there. This has many purposes. One thing is uniformity for your metadata across the collection. So this way they don't have to be concerned with, am I misspelling this? Am I doing something? Am I occasionally spelling this in English, sometimes in French? So they can just always put this in and it's always standard across the entire system. So that is the purpose of default metadata. So you can set this instance level metadata and templates to each user. So if I'm in there looking at an individual user to edit them, and that would apply for anyone who's a portal administrator or a system administrator, and you're looking at this, you have different options. You can define the templates they use when they edit the metadata, and you can define all these templates they use for submission. Additionally, these are all the different default metadata sets that we have in this system, and so you can select which ones they should have access to. So this way you can say that I know this user is only going to be working on this project. I'll set them to only be able to use this default metadata here and to use this template. Okay, so we sort of discussed the theory. I think has all been covered now of what is metadata, how does it work within our Sobek system. So we're basically going to run through just some demos and show you how this works. So we're going to add a new item through the online web interface, which we were just basically doing. Let me exit out of the Smart tool. Let me go back to my main screen here. So once you're logged on, if a user will come to this screen. If they have access to submit items, then they'll have this button to start a new item. So we'll click Start a New Item. We'll look at this grants of permissions. Alright, so if you have access to multiple templates and default metadata, you can go into your account and you can say, I would like my default to be, I'd like to submit through the DLock template, and I would like to use this set of default metadata. So this is a good way also for yourself to say, I have a lot of default metadata sets that I could utilize, but I know for the next 3 weeks I want to use this template with this metadata. So we'll hit Save. We'll go back and say Start New Item. We have this template. We'll hit Accept. After we read these granted permissions, we'll hit Accept, and let's just hit Next. So there's not many things that are absolutely required by this system, but the system requires a resource type and a main title. Obviously, you can put anything for your main title, but it's a required field. Put that in. Obviously, in your template, you can change that. In your template, you could say that language is an absolute required field that must be filled out. That must be at least one of them. So when you're entering data into this template, you can see these question marks. If we select one, it will pull up a help page that gives us information about this, gives us a whole wealth of data about this. So we have all those linked from every single one of these. If there was help linked for this template, there would be a little help link up here as well to go see that. So in there, you can make a nice little video and show people how to use your template if you like. So some of these fields are repeatable. Again, that's settable in each template. You can say in this template, you only want to have a single languages and not allow multiple. But whenever multiples are allowed, there's a little click button here, and you can click that. And so this allows you to add additional languages, additional other titles, for example, other creators. So we gave it our title, maybe we'll give it another language, Spanish. Maybe we'll give it an identifier. Different subject keywords here. We have a default note. We'll hit Next. So now we're given the option to upload things directly, our files, to this. You can upload any number of files. It's settable by the collection or by the instance of what extensions are allowed. But we can come in here. We'll navigate to some images that we have. Maybe we'll select some TIFF images. Select our first 5 TIFFs perhaps, and we'll hit Open. Alright, so then we'll see all these uploading. You can select up to 10, I believe, and they'll all automatically upload here simultaneously. So these are loading fairly quickly, partly because we're on or near this network. So as they load, they'll start to disappear as they complete. And finally it posts back, and you can see we've uploaded 5 TIFFs. The system immediately made JPEGs and thumbnails for us. So those are already in our system. This gives us a chance to label these. We can maybe call this cover, front cover, front matter, and then we start to say page 1, page 2, page 3, and then we'll hit Submit. So this is now adding our item into the database, adding it to the indexes so it's immediately searchable. And the JPEGs we saw are now uploaded as well. So we're given this congratulations screen, and it gives us different options. We can return to my home, We can view this item, we can edit this item, we can add another item if we like, or we can just look at our list of all submitted items. So we're going to say view this item, and there we are. So we uploaded these TIFFs, they were immediately converted into JPEGs for us, and now we can step through this and look at our digital resource. So that's a nice, easy way. We created a new item, we added the images we wanted to it. You can see the descriptive data that we entered, as well as the default metadata that was entered. So we'll go back to, let's do one more. Let's start a new item. And we'll use a different template this time, and we'll use the IR template with the UFIR default metadata. So that default metadata actually brings in fields that we don't even see here. There's a write statement that I'll show you that's brought in as part of the default metadata that's not exposed to the user to edit at this point. So we'll give it a title. And let's hit next. Oh, forgot to give it a material type. As I said, those are the two required things. We'll just call it conference proceedings. You can see here's more specific fields that are different based on our template. We have a publication status here. We can say it was published. We can define the publisher. Add URL for the item at that location. Add a publication date. And hit next. So again, we see in this it's saying it's optional. So this template does not require an upload, but it does provide you this opportunity. So we'll select files. Let's go back up to our desktop, perhaps. We can select, here's a couple TIFFs, and we can also maybe put up this Word document. So you see we're able to combine both page images as well as just other files we want to have added. So you see them, they go up, say completed for a bit, and then they disappear. As soon as all of them are submitted, we'll see the list of everything we've uploaded. So again, in this case, we uploaded some TIFFs. Those were processed. These will be uploaded as page images. Here it tells you these will be uploaded and will be included as downloads in your package. So you have another chance to name this. If there was something else you wanted to upload, you could now select that. You could navigate to it. Maybe we want to upload this Excel. Awfully quick. And then we'll hit submit. So again, we can say view this item. And these are the two images we uploaded. Now also see this downloads tab. This happens automatically when you upload new things. We call it Excel file and ARLPD bank user help. So we named these. So we see those available here. So that's a quick run through on two different styles sort of uploading. So quick comment, I guess, as we upload these items. Well, let's go in here first and I'll show you my list of my submitted items. So this is a list of all the items that I have submitted directly through the web portal interface. We'll go to the very end. So here's my test slide that I uploaded. Right, and here is a test title during the webinar. We uploaded this one really quick. Let's click on my test slide. So you'll notice now, after about a minute or so, that it says click on image below to switch to zoomable version. So in the background, the system then sees that a TIFF was uploaded and it creates these zoomable images for you. Okay, so here it is. It's now been generated, the JPEG 2000, so we can zoom in. So this happens about a minute later. We have something running in the background that keeps an eye on new items coming in, and this is one of the actions that it does. It takes a TIFF, and if it sees it come in, it will make the JPEG 2000. This is actually the older JPEG 2000 viewer. We use an external JPEG 2000 viewer currently. With the new release of version 4.0, the system is built in with this really nice sort of smoother zoomable version. And you can also go to full screen on them. Oh, I guess it was just coming in. So anyway, so that's the zoomable source. That happens in the background. We'll go back to my UFDC. Let's go to looking at, let's look at all my submitted items. Go to the end again. And let's look at this test titled. So again, in this one, you would be seeing the same thing. Now we can click in and we can zoom in on this object. So some of these things, some of the derivatives are actually created afterwards, not immediately by the system. All right, so we're also then going to look at metadata editing, which is editing the metadata for an online item through the web interface. So we can look at this item, which we have here. If we click Edit Metadata, at this point, it gives us some information at the top. We're editing this item. This is actually a template as well. It's an edit template, so it's got much more of the metadata that can be exposed for users to edit. There's some basic information up here that tells the user what to do. There's a link here for more detailed instructions. If there's custom help for this template, that would also be linked from here. So we can look here, we see the test title we entered. We can now change this. We can add other titles. We can add an abbreviated title. We can set a language. We didn't set a language for this one, apparently. Add more roles. Maybe there was someone who was an animator for this. We have different publishers. We could set the location on this one. So you can see these are actually different formats of the same field. So this one, these are more broken out essentially. So this was just one tab. This is material information. This is information that's basically about the resource, probably most likely found on the title page of that resource. If we click on subjects and notes, this is more subjective, obviously. These are subjects, genres, temporal coverages that are assigned to the material of the resource. You can assign target audiences. This is where your abstracts and notes come in. The third tab is record information. So this is slightly more detailed, a little bit less used, but your rights information appears here. So if you wanted to change the rights, you could just change it here. Or you could select a Creative Commons attribution if you'd like. You can give identifiers, so this is actually also in OCLC WorldCat, and you knew the number, you could enter it here as well. You can, if there's a related URL, you can add it here. So some of these actually have little pop-up forms. We'll give this a label. There's a URL of some sort. Close it. So this is the third tab. This tab, we more change really per instance, although the whole thing is customizable. So this is 3 of our extension schemas that we utilize. This is the learning object, the theses and dissertation, and the visual resource ones that we looked at earlier. While you're editing the resource online, you can look at a preview. You can say, this is what the citation would look like. So you can see our rights management. We have this nice little image because we selected Creative Commons. There's the OCLC number we just entered. So this is showing you what would happen for the data you just entered. Let's save. And all of our data that appears here. So when you're editing the metadata, you might notice it says you are using, in this case now we are using the full editing form. So last one we were just looking at, we didn't really have any complex data. So it uses the very simple form. So let's pull that up again. Let's pull up my test slide, say edit metadata. It says you are using the simplified editing form. So this is what we were talking about earlier when we were talking about complex objects. So you see this creator is just one string. It doesn't really have any more detailed data about it that we can give it. But if you use the full form, clicking that goes back and forth. Now when you click the creator, you see this little pop-up form. So this is the complex object. These are all the subfields of the complex object. So we can say it's not a personal, it's actually a corporate group. We can give the dates that it existed. We can give the location. The affiliation. And 3 different roles for this item. So if you're familiar with the MARC records as well, you can see how this maps pretty similarly over to those. So it disappears. We only showed this, but when you click on it, you see all these little subfields still exist. So this is what you get from the full form. If you import it from a MARC record, you would get the full form by default because you probably get all these little subfields. So that happens to several of these fields. I mean, some of them stay the same. Publication date, copyright year, these are still quite similar. But clicking on main title, you can again see main title now has statement of responsibility, part numbers, authority. You can get the language for this, a non-sort for this, if you wanted to say the test slide, and then that disappears. So you can see that using the full form gives you access to all of these little subfields. Same with the subject keyword. Now with subject keyword, we have access to every one of these individual facets that appear underneath that. So there's really two different versions for every editing form that we use. The full and the simplified, where you would just enter, where you only had access on this one to the scheme. So that's editing the metadata. When we can look at adding resources to an existing object. So here we can say we have these images. We'll go ahead and say manage files. Let's select a new file to upload. Maybe we'll upload this DAT file. So you can configure your system to allow different extensions. We've told our system not to allow .dat files. Most likely through an error. We probably should add that. But we'll say select files, and we can upload this PowerPoint. It uploads. We can give it our name and hit submit. So now we go to downloads, and now it appears here. So this manage files is how you can add existing downloadable files to your system, to the digital resource, I should say, to the one digital resource that you're working with. So you might want to add new page images. If we come here to images, we'll see we only uploaded the first 5 up to this page. So maybe we'll say manage files. In this case, you'll notice that JPEGs and TIFFs and such aren't down here. You can click here and say, I want to actually upload page images. And you point out here you can also edit it and delete your files here. But we'll say, let's upload more page images. Let's select our files. Let's go back in. Let's go by details, type. So there's JP2s, JPEGs. We're just going to upload our TIFFs again. So let's upload 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So those 5 TIFFs will upload. And as before, we'll see the TIFFs upload, and then the TIFFs will be converted to JPEGs and JPEG thumbnails as well in the background. And then a minute later or so, the builder will come along, and it will create those, make those zoomable images. So we can delete these if we like. We'll hit submit. The submit behavior is a little bit different between the uploading images and page images, because now we're brought to this screen. This is actually the quality control screen, which we're going to talk about quite extensively in the next training session. But we just quickly, I'll show you that right here we can name our pages, give it page 4 at least. So now we have front cover, front matter, page 1 all the way up to page 8. We'll hit complete. And now we see them in the drop-down menu. So there's the images we just upload. So to upload images, you can either go through the QC directly. If you click quality control, you can click this little plus sign to upload new page images. Or you can say manage files, handle these images, or select here to say upload page images. So this is really just a toggle. As you switch it, it sends you back and forth. And again, you can do some behaviors here at this level on these items. So we've looked at adding new items online, editing the metadata, and uploading images and files. That's really the bulk of what most people are doing with their digital resources online. But we also have these behaviors that I should show you. Click Edit Behaviors. So the difference between behaviors and metadata is that metadata really is about the resource itself. So if you take this resource and you load it to other people to put in their digital libraries, you want all that metadata to go with you. However, these are a little bit more about how it behaves in this system. So what aggregations or collections is this a part of? What word marks appear on the left-hand side? These are the word marks that are appearing on the left-hand side. So this is somewhat specific to the system, and certainly the names of the word marks are specific to this system. So that's considered a behavior. We can set the serial hierarchy if this is multiple items in the same title. We'll look at this again more in our next session. You can set different viewers. So we have the JPEG viewer listed. Maybe you also want to see the related images or thumbnail viewer, so we can add that one. You can change your main thumbnail here. You can also do that in the quality control application though. You could add new ticklers. So the tickler is, we were looking at that when we did the import. So we could add a tickler here and then use that as a search term. It's really just a way internally to pull materials together. You can say the item should be permanently dark and no one should have access to the related digital resources. And then we have some physical tracking information down here. So if you're dealing with the physical material, you could say once we're done with this item, if we're in the middle of digitizing it, that it could go ahead and be discarded. So we added thumbnail view as part of our behaviors change. So now we see thumbnails in this main menu. Select thumbnails, and you see the list of all the thumbnails that are part of this object. So that's what behaviors does. And again, all these things are linked, so help is provided for each one of these. But this really tells the object how it should react in this system. So we've looked at uploading new images and files. We looked at editing behaviors. And we're going to look at adding new volumes to an existing title now. So let me pull up an object that might make some sense to do that with. All right, we'll pull up the Gainesville Sun. And this is a case where we're using serial hierarchy. We have, in this case, we have issue 4. This is probably a test item from an earlier webinar. 1964, January. These are all the issues we have from that month and year. So we're going to go ahead and click on the object. So up here you see the bib ID and the vid. And so we've told this object to show up in this Digital Library of the Caribbean web skin as well, by the way, which is a option that we have at the top level. So I'll show you that as well. But you see this bib ID and the vid. That identifies this issue right here. So we can click on the bib ID. And now we're at the title level. So again, we don't see any images. All we see is the list of all the issues. There. So now we're looking at a true issue here. It's got great metadata with it. If we come in here, we see there's already lots of good data here. We have information on the publishers, the language, physical description, where, the place of publication, the coordinates, some good spatial cover stuff. So we want to add a new issue to this existing title, but we don't have to re-enter all of this. So that's where we click again on the title, and then you click Add New Volume. So what this does is add a new volume to an existing title or item group. So you can tell it where to import your metadata from, and we'll just say we want to import from this one for whatever reason. And then it gives you a chance to override the main title, which we don't need to do. But we'll override the date, perhaps. We'll say 2/2/1970. The serial hierarchy, which again we'll talk about more next time, you could enter that particularly if you wanted. If you wanted it to appear February 2. So what we're saying here is when we look at the list of all issues, we want it to say 1970 at the top level. You'll drill down to February, and then February 2nd, 1970. And so this is display order. Again, we'll talk about this a lot more in our next training session. But we just put in only the data we want to change, and then we'll hit save. And that will save it. So now we have a new issue from this year. We see the publication date is in here. If we look at all volumes, we'll see we've added it. 1970, which is all private or dark. February 1970. So if we've added this item, we didn't want it, we can come in here and click delete item. We'll hit delete. Okay, so it was in the middle of doing some work, but it moved some of the files to recycle bin, but not all of them. But it is removed from searches, and then there'll be a cleanup process that cleans anything that was left. So that's a way also to delete the objects once you've entered them. So that's quickly sort of showing you how you add a volume to an existing title. And so that pulls over all your metadata. You don't have to re-enter anything. It just duplicates, and then you can edit it and change it. So the very last thing I want to show you is spatial information. So this is in the new system. It's a beta. So we'll go into something. Let's do a geographic search for aerials, perhaps, in the aerials collection. We'll do a map search. The project that we are adding this with is actually a St. Augustine project. So let's search for St. Augustine. Why not? We'll put this here. Let's look for things that actually have the Castillo de San Marcos in the tile. Search. Here's one from 1960. Okay. So these tiles are our matching tiles. If you select one, it'll take you to it, and right here is the fort. So that we're able to use this geographic data to find an aerial tile that includes the point that we're most interested in right here. So how do you enter that data, and how do you edit the data? That's what we've been working on in the project. So here it says manage geospatial data. If we click this, it'll bring up this Google-based interface. This interface essentially lets you place points of interest geographically for a digital resource. For a single digital resource, allows you to manage these different overlays and locations. So it's really useful for photographs and maps. I mean, this makes perfect sense. We can come in here. This is a more complicated object than most people would be dealing with. We have all these different tiles. Each one has a different overlay, and we can go ahead and say, well, let's edit this one. So we select it. We say this is the tile we'd like to edit. Maybe we need to move it. Maybe it's not exactly right. And you could always rotate it as well. We're happy with that one. We can click on another one to edit. Brings us to the one that we're editing. You can change the transparency so we will see it. And you can see we actually have a problem on this placement. So this really should be placed more like over here. So we can go back and forth between the Google map and this tile and see that placement looks much better. So maybe we'll save that placement. So this is a way that you can go in and actually place these maps. This makes perfect sense too, like placing maps in a geographic system. If it was a photograph, you could say it would be location instead. But even for books, you can have these POIs or points of interest. You might want to put a dot saying this is where the author was born. Maybe this gives you circular, rectangular, and polygon points of interest as well. So you could say maybe this is the area that was most covered where the story takes place. Or maybe just chapter 1, and hit save. So you're able to save these just points of interest that would be interesting to a user when they're looking at your digital resource. So we'll just say File, save all of our changes. So it's saving these changes and our points of interest. And like I say, this makes sense for maps and aerials, but it really works for everything else as well. So that was one thing we wanted to show you, was the beta. So that will be released in version 4.0. Which is being released in December, mid-December. So that really is everything. We've showed you how to work with the item online. We showed you how to input items. We've given you some of the tools that you can use to really customize the experience for your users, your internal users or external users when they're submitting material. We talked about how you can edit metadata online, gave you some demos. We did demos of uploading files to existing items, looking at behaviors. So quickly, within just about an hour, I think, we've covered metadata and given demos of each of the major portions of it. So be sure to tune in for the next time. Training 3 will be on quality control and serial hierarchy. Thank you very much.